If your little brother walked into your room during the act, what would you do? In this story, I will tell you what I did. Listen to the end. It's worth it. My name is Ronald. I'm 22, and this happened just a couple of weeks ago when I came home for fall break. I haven't been home in over 2 years. When I got back, it was an emotional reunion. My mom cried, and my dad gave me one of those long, firm hugs that only dads can give. It felt so good to be wrapped up in their love again. We spent hours catching up over coffee at the kitchen table, and honestly, it felt surreal to be back. Later that day, Jason, my little brother, came home from college. He's 18 now, which still feels weird to say because in my mind, he's always been that goofy, scrawny kid who used to follow me around everywhere. But when he walked in the door, man, I was stunned. Jason had grown up. Like really grown up. He was taller than me now, broad shoulders, a lean but muscular build that filled out his clothes in ways I wasn't prepared for. His hair was styled, his jawline was sharp, and he just carried himself differently. Confident but still with that mischievous grin I remembered so well. "Ronnie," he shouted, dropping his bag and running up to hug me. I hugged him back, but I couldn't help noticing how solid he felt. It wasn't like hugging the kid I used to know. His arms wrapped around me, and I caught a whiff of his cologne, something warm and woody, maybe cedar. And it threw me off for a second. I rolled my eyes, but inside, I couldn't stop thinking about how much he'd changed. It was like I was meeting him for the first time all over again. We spent the evening hanging out in the living room with my parents, swapping stories about college and laughing until our sides hurt. Something had shifted, and I wasn't sure how to deal with it. After catching up with Jason and my parents, I headed upstairs to settle back into my old room. It felt like stepping into a time capsule. It was comforting, but also strange. Still, the peace was short-lived. As I sat on the bed, taking it all in, I couldn't ignore the other part of me, the restless part. The truth was, I hadn't been with anyone in, well, let's just say it had been longer than I cared to admit. Life overseas was exciting, sure, but between studying and trying to adjust to a completely new culture, dating had taken a back seat. And hookups, let's just say opportunities were few and far between. Now, sitting in my childhood bedroom, I felt all of that pent-up energy bubbling to the surface. It was embarrassing, honestly. Like, here I was, finally home after so long, and instead of basking in the joy of being reunited with my family, my body had other plans. I decided to take a shower, hoping it would help me relax. The water was hot, almost scalding, and it felt incredible after the long journey. I let it wash over me, closing my eyes and letting my mind wander. At first, I thought about mundane things, the flight, the food my mum had made for dinner, the stories Jason had shared, but eventually, my thoughts started to drift. I stepped out of the shower, wrapped myself in a towel, and headed back to my room. The house was quiet, and for some reason, that made everything feel more intense. I locked the door behind me, not something I normally did, but tonight it felt necessary. As I sat on the edge of the bed, my thoughts from the shower returned. I leaned back, closing my eyes, letting the tension in my body guide me. My fingertips brushed over my skin, a slow, deliberate movement that sent a shiver down my spine. It had been so long since I'd allowed myself this kind of release, and I wanted to savor every moment. My hand traveled to my lips, tracing them softly before moving down to my neck. The sensation was electric, each touch sending waves of warmth through me. I let my mind wander again, trying to picture something or someone to focus on. That's when, out of nowhere, Jason's face flashed in my mind. It was just for a second, but it stopped me in my tracks. My eyes shot open, and I sat there, confused and a little shaken. Why Jason? He was my brother, my family. The thought felt wrong, forbidden even. I tried to push it away, shaking my head as if that would help, but the image lingered. Jason with his easy smile and confident demeanor. Jason with those broad shoulders and that sharp jawline. Jason, who had hugged me so tightly earlier that day, his scent still faintly lingering on my clothes. Before I knew it, my hand was moving again, this time with a newfound intensity. The room felt warmer, cozier, almost like it was wrapping me in a blanket of comfort and desire. I closed my eyes again, letting the thoughts of Jason take over. It was intoxicating imagining him like that. The way his muscles flexed when he moved, the way his laugh lit up the room. I pictured his hands, strong and sure, tracing over my skin, his lips brushing against mine. It felt so vivid, so real, that I couldn't help but lose myself in it. My breathing grew heavier, the tension in my body building with each passing second. It was overwhelming, the mix of emotions and sensations flooding my senses. Part of me still felt guilty, like I was crossing some invisible line, but another part of me didn't care. That part wanted more, craved it. I let myself go completely, surrendering to the moment. The room seemed to fade away, and all that remained was the feeling, the heat, the desire, the overwhelming sense of release I'd been denying myself for far too long. I lay there for a while, my chest rising and falling as I caught my breath. It felt like the tension that had been building for months had finally broken, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt at peace. The next few moments were a blur, but not in the way you'd think. I was still caught up in my thoughts and the sensations coursing through me when it happened. I was so lost in the moment, in the warmth spreading through my body and the images in my mind, that I didn't hear the door open. It wasn't until I saw movement out of the corner of my eye that I realized someone was there. My heart stopped. My body froze. Jason's voice rang out like a jolt of electricity. "Ronald, let's go get." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The moment hung there, heavy and suffocating. Jason stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes wide as they locked onto me. I was still sprawled out on my bed, caught in the middle of, well, you know. My brain felt like it short-circuited. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stare back at him. For a few endless seconds, neither of us said a word. The shock on his face was mirrored by the heat rising in mine. Then, like someone hit a switch, the reality of the situation hit me all at once. I scrambled to cover myself, yelling something, anything to break the silence. "Are you kidding me, Jason? What the hell is wrong with you? Knock next time, you little idiot." My voice was sharp, louder than I intended, but it was the only way I could think to regain some semblance of control. Jason snapped out of his daze, his face turning bright red as he stammered something incomprehensible. I didn't mean to." He gestured vaguely toward the hallway, his hands fluttering like he didn't know what to do with them. Then, just as quickly as he barged in, he backed out, muttering something about needing a sign on the door before slamming it shut behind him. The second he was gone, I collapsed back onto the bed, my hands covering my face as a wave of humiliation washed over me. What the hell just happened? How had I let myself get so carried away that I didn't even hear him coming? But as the initial embarrassment started to fade, a different emotion took its place, something I didn't expect: excitement. I don't know how to explain it, but the memory of Jason's face, the way his eyes had widened when he saw me, sent a thrill through me that I couldn't ignore. It was wrong, I knew that. It was inappropriate and messy and all kinds of complicated, but my body didn't care. The adrenaline, the tension, the sheer heat of the moment, it was overwhelming. I lay there for a long time, replaying the scene in my head. The look on his face, the way he'd stumbled over his words, the way my own heart had raced when I saw him standing there, it was all burned into my mind. And as much as I hated to admit it, the thought of him seeing me like that, it didn't just embarrass me, it turned me on. I tried to shake the feeling, to tell myself it was just the adrenaline talking, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't going away. That night, I stayed in my room, unable to face him. I heard him downstairs, laughing with my dad like nothing had happened, and it made me feel even more ridiculous. How could he be so unaffected? Did he not care at all? Or worse, did he think it was funny? But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The way he'd looked at me, stunned, sure, but also something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on, stuck with me. And as the night went on, that look became the center of my thoughts. I couldn't stop imagining it. What if he'd stayed? What if, instead of running out, he'd stepped closer? What would he have said? What would I have done? The possibilities played out in my mind, each one more vivid than the last. My heart raced just thinking about it, and as much as I tried to push the thoughts away, they kept coming back, stronger and more insistent. By the time I finally fell asleep, I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't over. The next day was a blur of emotions. I didn't know what to make of everything that had happened the night before. Every time I thought about it, my stomach twisted into knots, a mix of embarrassment, guilt, and something else I couldn't quite name. I couldn't stop thinking about Jason, his expression, the way he looked at me when he walked in. It wasn't just the shock on his face that stuck with me. It was the way his gaze lingered, almost like he didn't know whether to look away or stay frozen in place. And that split second before he darted out of the room, there was something there, something that felt more than just awkward surprise. The whole thing rattled me. I couldn't focus on anything else, and it didn't help that I was walking around the house with the constant reminder that he was just a room or two away. Every sound he made, the thud of his steps on the stairs, the clatter of dishes in the kitchen, the way he hummed to himself when he thought no one could hear, was like a spark, igniting thoughts I wasn't ready to confront. And then there was me. I couldn't ignore the way my body reacted every time I thought about him. It was like my mind and my emotions were in a battle, one half telling me this was wrong, that I needed to stop thinking about it, and the other half pulling me deeper into those feelings. The tension was unbearable. Every time we crossed paths, it felt like there was this unspoken thing hanging between us. He didn't say anything about what happened, but he didn't have to. It was in the way he avoided my eyes, the way his sentences would trail off mid-thought whenever I was in the room. I caught him stealing glances a few times, quick and fleeting, like he didn't want to be caught, but each one sent a jolt through me that I couldn't ignore. By the time evening rolled around, the tension had reached its peak. My parents were heading out to visit my grandparents, leaving Jason and me alone in the house. My dad called us both into the living room to let us know they'd be back late and that we should figure out dinner for ourselves. Jason was sitting on the couch, flipping through his phone, while I leaned against the doorframe, pretending to be more relaxed than I actually was. "Don't wait up," my dad said, grabbing his coat. I nodded, mumbling something about looking forward to it. My mom chimed in, reminding us to lock the doors before they left, and then they were gone, leaving the house eerily quiet. Jason didn't say anything right away. He just stayed on the couch, his eyes glued to his phone like nothing was out of the ordinary. But I could feel it, the tension in the air, the way it felt heavier now that it was just the two of us. I went upstairs, trying to clear my head, but it didn't work. If anything, being alone in my room made it worse. The silence was deafening, and my thoughts were louder than ever. I kept replaying everything that had happened the night before, every detail amplified in my mind. I don't know what came over me, but as the hours went by, I felt this restless energy building inside me, something I couldn't shake no matter how hard I tried. I knew it was a terrible idea, that I should just stay in my room and let it pass, but the pull was too strong. Jason was in his room, probably asleep by now. The house was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside, casting long shadows across the hallway as I stepped out of my room. My heart was pounding, each beat louder than the last as I made my way toward his door. It was slightly ajar, just enough for me to push it open quietly. The room was dim, lit only by the faint glow of his bedside lamp. He was lying on his side, his back to me, the rise and fall of his breath steady and calm. I stood there for a moment, frozen in place. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave, to go back to my room and pretend none of this was happening. But another part of me, the part that had been building all day, refused to let me walk away. Before I could talk myself out of it, I stepped inside, closing the door behind me as quietly as I could. My heart was racing, every nerve in my body on edge as I approached his bed. I slipped under the covers beside him, moving carefully so I wouldn't wake him. His warmth was immediate, his body radiating heat that I could feel even without touching him. He was so close, his scent filling the air around me, and it was intoxicating. I lay there for a moment, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it, even in his sleep. The tension was unbearable, the weight of the moment pressing down on me like I could barely breathe. I don't know what I was thinking, or if I was even thinking at all. My hand moved almost on its own, brushing against his arm lightly, testing the waters. He stirred slightly but didn't wake, his breathing still steady and slow. The restlessness inside me reached its peak. The warmth of his body, the sound of his breath, the sheer proximity of him, it was overwhelming. I couldn't hold back anymore. But then, just as I was about to let myself go completely, he shifted. His breathing changed, becoming quicker and more shallow as he turned onto his back. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment he just stared at me, confusion and shock written all over his face. "Ronald." His voice was quiet, barely above a whisper, but it was enough to snap me back to reality. I froze, unsure of what to say or do. The tension between us was palpable, the weight of the moment hanging heavy in the air. One hand was on his leg, another hand was, well, you get where it was. I had never felt so intensely aware of another person before. Lying there beside Jason, every part of me was overwhelmed with the sheer gravity of the moment. My emotions were all over the place, nerves, tension, and an almost unbearable longing. I felt so close to him, and yet the space between us might as well have been miles. The stillness of the room made everything more vivid. His breathing, steady and calm, was a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. Every inhale and exhale seemed to echo, the sound filling the air around us and amplifying my racing thoughts. But then it happened. He stirred. A small movement at first, just a subtle shift as he rolled onto his back. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused for a second before they landed on me. The look on his face was pure confusion, followed by shock as he fully registered the situation. He blinked a few times, his brow furrowing as he pushed himself up slightly on one elbow. "Ronald," he said, his voice rough with sleep, "what are you doing?" I didn't have an answer, or at least not one I could say out loud. My mind raced, searching for something, anything that could explain what I was doing there. But instead of speaking, I acted on impulse. I reached out, my hand brushing against his arm, and he stiffened at the contact. His reaction was immediate, his muscles tensing under my touch, but he didn't pull away. Something about the way he looked at me, conflicted, maybe even curious, gave me the courage to keep going. "I couldn't help it," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "You came into my room, you saw me. It's been in my head ever since." He didn't respond, but he didn't move away either. The air between us felt charged, heavy with something unspoken but undeniable. My heart was pounding, my chest tight with anticipation as I closed the distance between us. I don't know what I expected, but the moment our lips met, everything else faded away. It was tentative at first, just a light press, testing the waters. But then something shifted. His initial hesitation gave way, and he responded, his lips moving against mine with a growing confidence that took me by surprise. The kiss deepened, becoming more insistent, more consuming. I could feel his hand resting lightly on my side, his touch hesitant but electrifying. I pushed him back gently, guiding him until he was lying down again. I leaned over him, my hands on either side of his head, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt completely in control. The intensity of it all was almost too much to handle. Every touch, every movement, every little sound he made sent a jolt through me, like electricity coursing through my veins. Being this close to him, feeling the warmth of his body against mine, was more than I could have ever imagined. I let myself get lost in the moment, in the way his breath hitched when I kissed the corner of his mouth, in the way his hands tentatively found their way to my back, pulling me closer. It was uncharted territory for both of us, but there was something raw and genuine about it that made it feel so right. We were both on our knees on the bed, facing each other, and the energy in the room was almost electric. There was this quiet intensity between us that made everything feel so much more vivid, like time had slowed down just for us. I could see the way his muscles tensed slightly, his chest rising and falling as he tried to steady his breathing. His hand, strong, veined, and full of that raw masculine energy, moved slowly but purposefully. It was mesmerizing. I couldn't help but let my hand rest on his chest. His heartbeat was fast, maybe faster than mine, which made me realize just how much this moment meant to him too. He was new to all of this, still learning to navigate the space we were creating together, but that didn't make him hesitant. If anything, it made him more focused, almost fiercely determined to do it right. And he did. Despite the nerves I could feel radiating off him at first, he somehow turned that into this quiet confidence. He leaned into the process with such assertiveness, and that shift hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, that connection we were building in real time. For me, it was like experiencing something I thought I already understood, but magnified 5 times over. Every sensation was heightened, every moment stretched out, and the way he took control, not aggressively, but in this firm, self-assured way, made everything feel safe yet exhilarating. It wasn't just what he was doing, it was how he was doing it, with a mix of tenderness and boldness that caught me off guard. I could tell he was proud of himself, even if he didn't say it out loud. The way he glanced at me, checking my reactions, made it obvious. And trust me, my reactions were giving him all the encouragement he needed. By the end of it, I wasn't just impressed, I was completely floored. He may have been a newbie, but he carried himself like someone who knew exactly what he was doing. And in that moment, he absolutely did. That moment was such a turning point. It felt like everything shifted when I asked him if he had protection. I could see it on his face, how he immediately understood where this was all headed. There was this mix of realization and nervous excitement in his expression. He didn't say much, just nodded slightly, but the weight of that little gesture said everything. It was like this silent agreement between us, and from there, things just unfolded naturally. He got what he got, and honestly, so did I. A moment later, I found myself above him, my body pressed lightly against his as I hugged him from behind. I wrapped my arms around his shoulders, letting my hands rest on his chest, and I nuzzled into the curve of his neck. His skin was warm, and I could feel every rise and fall of his breath, a rhythm that matched the anticipation building between us. I could tell it wasn't entirely comfortable for him at first. His body stiffened slightly, a reflex, but I didn't rush anything. I stayed gentle, careful, giving him time to relax into it. And he did. Slowly but surely, I felt him ease into my touch, his breathing becoming slower, deeper. That was my cue to move, to let myself get lost in the moment. I kissed the back of his neck first, soft and tentative, testing how he'd respond. His shoulders twitched slightly, like he wasn't expecting it, but then I felt him lean into me, his body unconsciously seeking more. I let my lips trail lower, across his shoulders and down his back, each kiss a little firmer than the last. His skin was smooth, but I could feel the tension in his muscles, the way they shifted under me with every move I made. I matched his rhythm, moving slowly at first, letting the connection between us grow stronger with each second. It was like his body was speaking to me, responding to every touch, every kiss. When I ran my hands down his sides, his breathing hitched for just a moment, and I felt this subtle shiver run through him. That reaction sent a jolt through me too. Seeing him let go like that was something else. It felt so raw, so real. As I moved, his body seemed to melt into mine, like we were syncing up without even trying. I pressed myself a little closer, letting him feel the full weight of me, and the way his body responded, how he leaned back into me, how his breathing quickened, was everything. I couldn't stop myself from whispering something soft against his ear, not even fully sure of what I said, just letting the moment take over. Even now, writing this, my heart feels like it's sinking all over again just thinking about how incredible it was. That mix of tenderness and intensity, the way we moved together, like we'd done this 100 times before, but still discovering something new, it was unforgettable. Every second of it. The way he turned and hugged me, his arms wrapping tightly around my body, took me by surprise. There was a tenderness in the way he held me, like he was trying to say something without words, as if that touch was his way of grounding himself in the moment. I felt his hand find the back of my head, his fingers threading softly through my hair. It was such a small gesture, but it carried so much meaning, care, trust, maybe even vulnerability. I tilted my head slightly, leaning into the touch, and in that moment, it felt like everything else disappeared. It was just the two of us, cocooned in this shared space of intimacy. His palm lingered, warm and firm, stroking my hair in a way that sent shivers down my spine. I glanced up at him, and that's when I noticed it. His face was flushed, a deep red spreading from his cheeks down to his neck. He looked so different from his usual self. It wasn't embarrassment, exactly. It was more like the weight of the moment hitting him all at once. I smiled softly, wanting to reassure him, but before I could say anything, I felt him shift beneath me. His hands moved to my sides, his grip tightening ever so slightly, and I realized what he was trying to do. He wanted to switch places to take control, maybe because he felt like he needed to match my energy or prove something to himself. But I wasn't going to let him, not this time. "No," I whispered, my voice calm but firm, pressing my hands gently against his shoulders to stop him from moving. He hesitated, his eyes meeting mine with a mix of surprise and curiosity. I leaned in closer, my lips brushing against his ear as I murmured, "Let me finish where I started." He relaxed almost instantly, his body softening beneath mine, though I could still feel the tension in his muscles. I knew he wasn't entirely used to this, to letting someone else take the lead, but I could also sense that he trusted me. That trust was like fuel for me, igniting something deeper, more powerful. I adjusted my position, becoming more deliberate in my movements. There was a shift in the air, a quiet confidence radiating from me that I knew he could feel. I wasn't just leading. I was claiming this moment, embodying something older, stronger, more certain than I'd ever been before. My hands moved over his body with purpose, tracing the lines of his chest, his sides, his arms. I could feel the heat radiating off his skin, the way his body responded to every touch. He was breathing heavily now, each exhale shaky but full of surrender. His head tilted back slightly, exposing his neck, and I couldn't resist leaning down to kiss it. My lips pressed against his skin, warm and damp from the heat of the moment, and I could feel his pulse racing beneath them. He shivered under me, and I couldn't help but smile against his neck. There was something so empowering about seeing him like this, about knowing I was the one making him feel this way. My kisses trailed down his neck to his collarbone, slow and deliberate, each one a silent promise that I wasn't going to stop until we both felt the full weight of this moment. His hands found my back again, fingers pressing into my skin as if he needed to hold onto something to keep himself grounded. He murmured something under his breath, a soft, almost inaudible sound that made my chest tighten. I didn't ask him to repeat it. I didn't need to. I could feel everything he was trying to say in the way he touched me, in the way his body moved with mine. As I continued, I could sense the shift in him. The initial nervousness was gone, replaced by something else, something raw and unfiltered. He wasn't just letting me lead anymore. He was meeting me halfway, responding to my every move with an energy that matched my own. But I still held the reins, guiding him, pushing him just enough to keep him on the edge. I became bolder, my movements more assertive, my touch firmer. I could see the effect it had on him, the way his face flushed even deeper, the way his breathing hitched with every deliberate shift of my body. He was completely lost in the moment, and so was I. There was this unspoken understanding between us, a rhythm we'd fallen into that didn't need words. It wasn't just about physicality, it was about trust, about letting ourselves be completely vulnerable with each other. And as I leaned down to kiss him again, this time on his lips, I felt that connection solidify into something unshakable. I didn't stop until I was sure he felt everything I wanted him to feel. And when I finally pulled back, breathless and flushed myself, I looked into his eyes and saw something that made my heart skip a beat: pride. Not just in me, but in himself too. He may have started this as a newbie, unsure and hesitant, but by the end of it, we'd both grown into something more. Even now, as I write this, my heart sinks at the memory. Not out of sadness, but because it was so profoundly good, so intensely real, that part of me wishes I could relive it all over again. Moments like that don't just happen, they're made, crafted in the quiet intimacy of trust and connection. And this one, it was unforgettable. The next morning, the light filtered softly through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the room. It was the kind of light that makes you lose track of time, where everything feels suspended between dreams and reality. I woke up first, my body still heavy with the comfort of sleep, but my mind slowly stirring. For a moment, I stayed still, soaking in the quiet. He was still beside me, his body warm and relaxed, his face peaceful in a way that tugged at my heart. The night before had been everything. And seeing him like that, his guard completely down, only made it all feel even more real. I slipped out of bed quietly, not wanting to disturb him. The air in the room was cool against my skin as I made my way to the bathroom, still feeling the aftershocks of the night before in the way my body moved, a little slower, a little more aware. I turned on the shower, letting the water heat up, and stepped in, the warmth immediately washing over me. It felt like a reset, like I was grounding myself in the moment, letting the events of the previous night settle into something I could carry with me. The sound of the water filled the small space, drowning out everything else, and for a few minutes it was just me, alone with my thoughts. I tilted my head back, letting the water run over my face and down my shoulders, and couldn't help but replay the night in my mind. The way he had opened up to me, how we'd connected in a way that felt deeper than just the physical, it was all still so vivid. I smiled to myself, The kind of smile that comes when you know you've experienced something unforgettable. Just as I was about to step out, I felt it, a presence behind me. Before I could turn around, his arms slid around my waist, pulling me gently back against him. His body was warm despite the cool air that had followed him into the shower, and the contrast against the heat of the water made me shiver slightly. His chest pressed against my back, firm and solid, and I could feel his breath on my neck, steady and calm. "I thought you were still asleep," I said softly, my voice barely audible over the sound of the water. "I was," he murmured, his lips brushing lightly against my shoulder. "But then I woke up and you weren't there." There was something in his tone, playful, maybe even a little possessive, but it only made me relax further into him. His hands moved up from my waist to my chest, his fingers splaying out as they explored the lines and curves of my body. He was gentle, deliberate, taking his time as if he was trying to memorize every inch of me. I closed my eyes, letting myself get lost in the sensation. The water cascaded over us, streaming down his arms and onto my chest, and I couldn't help but lean back into him, letting him support my weight. His touch was different now, confident, assured. It wasn't the hesitant, careful exploration of the night before. This was him taking control, and I realized in that moment that I was completely okay with it. More than okay. I wanted this. His hands moved slowly, tracing patterns across my skin that sent shivers through me despite the heat of the shower. He tilted his head down, his lips finding the side of my neck, and the way he kissed me, soft but insistent, made my heart race. It wasn't rushed or hurried. He was savoring it, savoring me. I turned my head slightly, just enough to catch a glimpse of his face. His expression was intense but soft, his eyes half-lidded with focus as he lost himself in the moment. It struck me then just how far we'd come in such a short time. The hesitation and uncertainty I'd seen in him the night before were completely gone, replaced by this quiet, unshakable confidence. "You're amazing," I said, my voice low but full of sincerity. He didn't respond with words. He didn't need to. Instead, he let his actions speak for him. His hands tightened slightly on my chest, pulling me even closer to him, and I could feel the steady rhythm of his heart against my back. It was such a simple thing, but it carried so much weight, like he was telling me without words how much this moment meant to him. The water continued to flow over us, mingling with the warmth of his touch, and I let myself be completely present in the moment. I wasn't thinking about what came next, about what this meant or where we were going. All that mattered was how he made me feel, safe, wanted, cherished. He shifted slightly, guiding me to turn around so that we were facing each other. His hands moved to my hips, holding me steady as his eyes met mine. There was something almost reverent in the way he looked at me, like he couldn't quite believe I was real. I reached up, letting my fingers trail along his jawline, and he leaned into my touch, his eyes fluttering closed for a moment. "You really don't hold back, do you?" I teased lightly, a small smile playing on my lips. "Not when it comes to you," he replied, his voice steady but full of emotion. That answer hit me harder than I expected, and for a moment I couldn't find the words to respond. Instead, I leaned in, letting my forehead rest against his as the water continued to pour down around us. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, just holding each other, letting the warmth and the closeness speak louder than anything we could say. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about him taking control or me letting him. It was about balance, about trust. We'd found something together that felt bigger than either of us, something that made all the vulnerability, all the openness, feel worth it. When we finally stepped out of the shower, the air felt cooler against our skin, but the warmth between us didn't fade. He grabbed a towel, wrapping it around both of us as he pulled me close again, his arms encircling me in a way that made me feel completely secure. 2 weeks later, I left. Life pulled me in a different direction, and even though I knew it was coming, it didn't make the parting any easier. The first few days, I tried to keep myself busy, throwing myself into routines and distractions, but it didn't take long for the quiet moments to creep in, the ones where I found myself thinking about you. I'd catch myself replaying little snippets in my head. The way your face flushed that night when you finally let go, the way your hands felt on me in the shower, steady and reassuring. It's the kind of thing that sticks with you, you know? The kind of memory that doesn't just fade into the background, but stays vivid, like it happened yesterday. I miss you. A lot more than I thought I would. And I don't just mean the physical stuff, though let's be honest, that was unforgettable. It's everything else too. The way you'd look at me like you were still trying to figure me out, like every moment with me was something new. The way you'd smile, even just a little when you thought I wasn't looking. The way you let me in, bit by bit, until I could see the real you. To be completely honest, it's hard to explain exactly what I'm feeling. It's this strange mix of longing and warmth, of knowing that what we had was something special, but also wishing we'd had more time. And yeah, I know, maybe it's not the kind of thing people are supposed to talk about. Maybe it's one of those forbidden things that everyone says you should leave in the past. But I can't help it. I don't regret a single second of it. Not one. You might judge me for saying this, or maybe others would, but I don't care. I love it. I love the way it made me feel, how alive and connected and real it all was. And honestly, I want to do it again, even if it's risky, even if it's complicated. Because the truth is, moments like that don't come around often. When they do, you hold on to them. At least I do. So here I am, putting it all into words because I don't know how else to process it. I don't know when or if I'll see you again, but I hope you know this. You left an impact on me. A big one. And no matter what happens next, I'll always remember those 2 weeks, that night, that morning, and every little moment in between.